Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. We have Lord Sterling. I'm trying to get a kick out of your title. Tim Alexander, and of course, I got an email this morning.
Tell you, that title and $1, I can go to almost any cheap Coke machine and buy a Coke, provided I have the dollar.
Right. Now, here's the point. I heard some people say you're an apologist for Putin. We're not apologists for Putin.
No.
We're not talking about good guys, okay? Putin is being pulled, like it says in the Bible, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, with hooks into his jaw. Putin is a dyed-in-the-wool Russian nationalist communist. He's also a Christian, which, of course, you have to understand what kind of Christian he is. He's a Russian Orthodox Christian, but his version is, we won't believe in a strong Russia, okay? Now, when you mix this all together, you're dealing with somebody who's a real hard-ass, as they say, tough guy, who isn't necessarily a good guy if you tick him off. Now, if you treat the Russians with respect, they're just like the people in the Middle East. They'll give you the shirt off their back. But if you mess with them, you really don't want to do that. And I think what people want to say is we're not apologists for Putin. What we're saying is Putin is being abused by the West to haul him into a war, which is what it says in Ezekiel 38 and 39, that it says in there, I shall put hooks in their jaws and pull them down to a war in the Middle East.
Well, and
Russia's being pulled into this war. They don't want to do it because they know it's bad for business. It's bad for their oil industry. It's bad for expanding their industry so they have more than just the oil industry to supply jobs in Russia.
It may be a planetary extinction event, you know? I mean,
right, and the thing is that Putin isn't necessarily a good guy, but he's a reluctant bad guy. He is a guy that's a mixed good and bad because he's literally been the only one to stop World War III 3 times in the last year. Not because he's necessarily a wonderful person, but because he'd like to have Russians in the future on the planet Earth. He'd like to have his nation not nuked by America and other countries, including Israel, who has lots of nukes and the Samson option aimed at relatively short distance. Most people don't realize that Red Square and the Temple Mount, Mount Moriah, are on the same latitude. Did you know that right to the last second and minute, they're in the same latitude? So if you draw a line directly north, literally to the second and minute, right through Mount Moriah goes right through the center of Red Square. Isn't that amazing?
No, I didn't know that. I've been in Red Square several times.
It's exactly north. I mean, like right to the minute. So what people should understand, and of course for 600 years, the Russians had considered the third Rome. The first Rome being Rome, then of course Constantinople, and the third Rome being...
No, absolutely. Yeah, I had this drop-dead beautiful Russian girlfriend for a while after my wife died, and I got to visit Russia and got to know a lot of Russians, and they will give you the shirt off their back if they know you. But they're the most nationalistic people I've ever met. You're either a Russian or you're a foreigner. That doesn't mean that they mistreat you or anything. It's just they're very very conscious of their Russian heritage, and by and large, they're good people. I mean, I really got along with them, and I still know some Russian people, and they're good people. But they're not... their leaders are maybe far from saints, but they haven't gone so far down the hellish rabbit hole that they'll do anything, including blow up the world. And
well, that's one of the reasons why with the Cold War we never had Armageddon. I mean, the fact that we were not dealing with Muslims controlling the bomb, but Russian communists. In fact, I talked to philosophers about this, and the fact is, because the communists, and we're talking about real dyed-in-the-wool atheists that don't believe that there's anything beyond what we have, and they made this comment, this is philosophers, that it's a good thing we were dealing with atheists because they thought, this is all we have, we better not blow it up, which is why we didn't have a launch-on-command sequence that destroyed the world during the Russian Cold War. Now, if Islam in the last 60 years has had the bomb, we would a long time ago blown up and decided to visit to see our Maker.
You probably are totally 100% right, because there is a really crazy aspect to part of Islam that's just way over the top.
Well, that's why dealing with them is so dangerous. It's the idea that we have to deal with these people is like, excuse me, do you really think that you want to give the bomb to Muslims? I don't think so.
No, that's true. You don't, but on the same time, I've known a lot of Muslims, and, well, not a lot, but a number, and, most people are people.
Well, of course, a lot of Muslims are just Muslim because they were born Muslim. Yeah. But the problem is that even the mild Muslims, the ones we call moderates, are not speaking out against the extreme ones. And I want to prod them to say, hey, if you want us to accept, quote, a moderated Islam, speak out against the wackos in your group that need to be dissected away and really truncated off.
You're right, but you know what? How many preachers and priests and so forth are speaking out about the fact that America is running, supporting, organizing, and funding, along with Saudi Arabia, the ISIS.
Yeah, but I don't consider the pastors and the priests
Christians.
I don't consider the pastors and the priests the leaders. The leaders are people like you and me that are real Christians that won't mind disrespecting Christians or aren't acting in a Christian manner like Jesus Christ. And those people who call themselves Christians and are not are no different than when Jesus said he was dealing with the synagogue of Satan, and he called the so-called Jews, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He said, you're of the synagogue of Satan. He didn't mince his words. People thought, well, he was socially inappropriate on the day. No, when he took that whip out, the cat of nine tails, and started whipping the money changers in the temple, and he did it twice, not once. You have to understand, you make God mad and you make Yeshua Jesus mad when you do things that really tick him off and really tell you that the only way he can get through to you is with his anger. And the problem is we need to show some anger toward our so-called fellow Christians, and that includes these pastors who try to silence the prophets, silence the people with the apostolic anointment, silence the people who actually have a geopolitical analysis of what's going on and realize we're in the end times. This is not something where a lot of the pastors, in fact, I remember I won't mention the church, but the pastor said to me, well, we're the welcoming committee. We really don't deal with prophecy because we don't understand it and we don't want to confuse people. So even though a third of the Bible is prophetic and we're sitting literally on the edge of a world war, and we're in the economic phase right now, this pastor had the nerve to try to disrespect me and treat me like I was a little child, to say we're not interested in prophetic understanding because it's going to make as a witness to other people to say, despite all this happening, and people try to bury their head in the sand, and economic chaos is coming, and war's coming, and water wars are coming to take our food, and they've got this carbon tax and everything else going on, Agenda 21, and ICLEI and all these other nasty things. These are not theoretical; they're very real. And yet the pastor had the nerves to say to me, "We don't want to hear that. We're just a welcoming committee. We want you to feel good on Sunday."
Dr. Bell, I think probably a third, at least, of the American population are completely oblivious to everything that's happening. Another third are somewhere in between, and fortunately a third are pretty much waking up to what's happening. Now, there are degrees of waking up, but a lot of people are beginning to wake up.
Well, I think the waking up, firstly, is waking up to God, Jesus, okay? I'm going to give the definition of a relationship with Jesus. Firstly, what God tried to say is he wanted a relationship with us. That's why in the garden, the initial or original sin was taken from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is deciding for ourselves without prayer or consulting God what was good or evil. That's the original sin. It wasn't taking a piece of fruit.
By Satan.
Right. Now that piece of fruit was not taking like a pomegranate or some other fruit. It was deciding for ourselves what was good or evil. That's the basis of all sin. We think we're so damn smart or so clever or so more in tune with our reality than God, we don't need to consult him. Or we also think that because we're living in a lake of fire, it's hopeless, and the only way is to reject all society and say we're outcasts and we can't have a stable family with love, and we can't prosper financially so we can help other people. No. What God wants us to do is hear and do his will and not be afraid of death or suffering in this world if we don't go along with it. Because if you're of the world, which means if you're willing to sacrifice ethics for money, power, or position, then you're of the world. What God said, if you hear my voice and you do my will, you will be suffering in this world, but you'll also be blessed too. And when you're blessed, you should bless others with that, but all of it comes because we hear and do his will. Welcome back, and Tim, give us a thumbnail of what's happening in the news. And stay over, of course, in the second segment, because we need to tie it into Fukushima, and now we hear reports that even Walmart is getting ready for New Madrid super earthquake in the Midwest. That report was up on Drudge yesterday.
Remember, cellular warfare can trigger earthquakes, and
Right.
we're headed towards the Third World War. So that's one of the delightful things that is in this cornucopia right out of hell.
And by the way, the Russians have those weapons too. We're not the only ones that have all kinds of fancy scalar and weather weapons. Russians, in fact, this is like 10 years, 12 years ago, there was a giant cyclone heading toward Sao Paulo, Brazil. And the Brazilians are totally freaked out. Sao Paulo is a huge city. Was it 20 million people? It's huge, right? And so what happened is the Russians say, no problem. We move storm away from coast. You have no problem. And they hired the Russians. The Russians probably came into the Antonov jets with their fancy scalar weapons. They moved the cyclone away from the coast.
Yeah, and it's very
this is,
rare
by the way,
to have a cyclone in the South Atlantic, but they do happen rarely. And
right.
Okay, Israeli tanks have shelled a UN-run school that was serving as a UN refugee center. So, you know, the Israelis pull up a bunch of Morocco tanks. They begin shelling this place.
Right.
16 have been killed, 200 or so civilians were wounded. We're talking children, old people, women, men. The UN Secretary General has had a fit about it. You know, he said he's appalled by the attack on a UN school in northern Gaza where hundreds had taken refuge. And he said, when I briefed the Security Council just 2 days ago, I condemned Hamas rocket fire. But he said, I also called on Israel to exercise particular care to avoid any attack on United Nations premises where civilians have taken refuge.
Right.
So literally, the Netanyahu government is doing everything they can to provoke an uprising, a third intifada, not only in Gaza, which is obviously inflamed, but in the West Bank, and to
and in Lebanon, which of course
countries.
has some real serious weapons, and in Syria that has even more serious weapons.
Well, right, Hezbollah and Lebanon and so forth. Netanyahu, and I've been saying this for some time, wants a general Middle East war. And they tried to attack Syria, and the Russians, this was about a year or so ago, and the Russians sent a really large battle fleet off the shore. That stopped it. They were going to, they flew in a whole bunch of fighters, American F-15s, American Belt F-15s in Azerbaijan to attack Iran from the north, and the U.S. and the Iran.
They left two of them there, by the way. One of them was the one that we are pretty certain, by the way. All the evidence, although they're still fiddling, they did hand over the box, you know, what's called the recording box from the aircraft, the MH17. There's all kinds of crazy stuff out there.
Orange, but they call them black box.
Orange, exactly. They call it orange box, it's called. But some people are even putting out crazy stories like they think it was the old Malaysian Flight 370 and it was refurbished and sent out.
Nonsense.
It's all nonsense. They put up by disinfo ops, okay?
What they're ignoring is the 2-ton elephant in the living room, and that is that plane was on the same heading, altitude, etc., minutes before when it was in south of Warsaw, as Putin's Air Force One was. And with the spoofing that they do, ECM and all, they can literally, and they did this just over a month ago in Europe during NATO exercises, they can selectively cause planes to disappear from the radar screen. They can move them several hundred miles away. They can change their ID squawking and everything else. That's what they did. The Israelis shot down the wrong plane, and everything else is a cover-up. But that, by the way, took place on the first day of this latest Gaza war. It's directly tied into what's happening in the Middle East and to the economy. Remember, Putin was coming back from the BRICS conference in Brazil. This is a major effort by a number of sizable countries, Russia, China, South Africa, Brazil, and a whole host of other countries that are supporting them, to break apart and to destroy the Rothschild-headed global banking cartel, because they see what's happening. I mean, they see that we are headed to this demonic new world order. They see all these individual leaders of these various countries realize that they're toast. that they've been independent, they've been actual leaders of their countries, and they're targeted for destruction and death, and their countries are targeted for slavery, and they're not going to go there. And I've always said that the most dangerous time for the globalists and for the world is when the globalists reach out to try to grab everything to make their
right.
one.
Well, they're doing it right now, and I think we are less than a year away from the peace treaty. I think we're less than 2 years away from the starting of the Jewish sacrifice on the Temple Mount. That's my guess. It's not a prophetic word right now, so don't hold me to it. I think that the war in the Middle East, that we have the Russian Duma, the fact that the Russian Duma has met to emergency session and we haven't prevented the summer session from the Congress just taking off because it's time to have a vacation in the middle of a catastrophe.
Those political horrors do nothing. All they've done.
Well, here's the point: that if the Russians were going to do something, if the Russians are going to lay down and say, Europeans, you're right, we're terrorists, we want to just be nice now, we're going to play good in the sandbox of the world, the Russians are not going to play nice. They're majorly pissed off. You tried to whack through the Israelis, the Russian president, coming back from the BRICS meeting to put $100 billion together to have an alternative to the IMF and World Bank. We have sanctions by the Abominator. And again, I heard a real good message by one of our listeners to call it Obamacide. I like that instead of the Unaffordable Care Act, Obamacide, because it forces people to go to a healthcare system that navigates them through these navigators to kill them with toxic polypharmacy, unnecessary surgery, useless care, and what's called memory care, which is what you get before they finally put you in a hospice. Obamacare is an obscenity, okay? It's an obscenity. And what we have to understand is that Obamacare is what they're going to offer everyone.
Obscenity coming from the Obama administration. What is
right? But we have the obscenity of the immigration issue, where if we really did make refugees out of these kids, send air-conditioned buses so these little babies don't die in the way.
We set this up months ago. We put
right. Secondly, we have to divide the issue of why do we have open borders, and now Obama's going to send down a mission to look at what's going on in Texas and elsewhere to say maybe we should reconsider it. Come on, Obama. All you do is pick up the phone and talk to these governors of 4 states that are dealing with this crisis and with their own personal cost to their state populations. And then we have the situation here where Putin now has recalled the Duma, which is the Russian government. The fact that they're not saying anything is bad. Because if they're saying something or capitulating or trying to put out another, a summer basket of fruit, as it says in the Bible, to say, hey, we'd like to kind of make friends again. Here's a basket of fruit on your front doorstep. Let's be buddies. No, they're not going to do that anymore. Russia's really on the warpath.
We're about out of time, but to tie something into that, there have been several outbreaks of really bad diseases around the world. One of them took place in China. And it was Black Death, bubonic plague. Now, we had an airborne bubonic plague.
They have that here in Colorado now, Black Death in Colorado. Do you know that?
In China, they sealed off a city of 30,000 people. I mean, lock, stock, and barrel, quarantined the entire city.
We're on break now. Randy, can you get a turn
of satisfied customers?
And we have Chris Harris now. And, of course, Tim is still here in the background, and we'll pull him in for specific comments. One of the big stories we want to talk about is the Walmart story. This story is pretty scary. It deals with the fact that Walmart openly is saying they're preparing for a superquake along the New Madrid fault system, and all their stores that are within strike distance, which is up to 300 to 400 miles. We're not just talking about a few miles around. Because the largest earthquake on the American continental United States was in Missouri in 1811, 1812. And that these quakes actually created one lake, in fact, I think it's 26 miles long in Missouri. There's still, if you want to call undulations in the ground in Missouri, that are still frozen right into the landscape. People should understand the force that was involved is mind-boggling. And we have, I think, somewhere around at least a quarter of all the nuclear reactors in the United States literally within strike distance of the New Madrid Fault. That's not good. Many of them are the old-style reactors, Mark I reactors, boiling water reactors, old-style reactors where the seismic tests, if they actually did the JASCO testing, which would be requested over the last few years after JASCO got removed as the director of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they have the new kind of so-called rubber stamp person who's, I think, a geologist. I don't think she's even a nuclear expert. Right. She basically is rubber stamping everything, not saying anything. There's no public statements, no updates about what's going on in terms of JASCO's request before you get removed from this position. what happened, Jasco reports, is that on its face, probably most of the reactors that are within strike distance of any fault zone, like Diablo Canyon, Northern California, the San Onofre, which is now turned off, is literally within the San Jacinto strike zone, which is 5 miles off the coast near the Catalina Island, which could create a tsunami even bigger than the one that hit Fukushima Daiichi in Japan. Literally 5 miles off the coast, right before it even hits Catalina. And yet, all these reactors literally sitting within strike zone, they don't have reports to tell us if they need to rebuild the reactor and put, seawalls up or increase the support structure so you don't get subsidence or thixotropic sliding of the building into the muck, or the loss of containment of the general reactor core. I mean, it's really incredibly stupid. And even Walmart's worried that they're going to end up with infrastructure like highway and overpass breakdowns, power line breakdowns, which is why a lot of these big corporations, including Walmart, are getting on-site power generation. They have fuel cells, for example, and their own power cells for maintaining power within them because they have a lot of frozen food, a lot of material, etc. And a lot of by the way, the Walmart stores are also secondary FEMA distribution centers and also encampment centers for some of the so-called out of action Walmart stores, are places where they can literally bring people in for, if you want to call, open air prisons. People say, oh no, they wouldn't do that. I said, yeah, there's a lot of building there. They have a method for building Walmart stores, and these are pretty, same with the Postal Service. I mean, I know I saw the actual plans years ago and actually got them smuggled right out of the Postal Service and their special departments working with DARPA and with FEMA, etc. So this is not a joke, okay? So when Walmart starts saying publicly they're worried about a superquake, it's because they know something, just like the United Nations knew something when they moved their material away from the Gulf of Mexico. So I think 300 or 400 miles inland away from the Gulf of Mexico, they were worried about a methane hydrate explosion occurring at the Macondo drill site because it's a potential that could have happened. And by the way, those United Nations material and things you can see on Google Earth are still moved away from the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. And you don't hear about that, do you? So, as I say, the most important thing is don't believe anything we say. Check it out yourself and ask better questions. If you believe blandly what we say, you're just showing disrespect. You've got to own the truth, and it means you have to ask the questions. That way you can't use it in ad hominem attacks to attack me or anybody else that we have in the program. All we want you to do is say, I think I should ask a question. That's a good thing. Because if you research it and you find out something, you might actually do something or even talk to your friend about it. And that's important, because when we have our U.S. government doesn't understand the entire southeast United States might become a radioactive radiation zone like Fukushima, only many times worse because you have a lot more reactors there. This is not a good thing if you have a superquake there. So tell us all about it, Chris.
Okay, Dr. Bill, I guess several years ago now, we previewed the new geological maps showing the expected or potential for seismic activity. We did that on your show as soon as I got a hold of it, and now what we're seeing now is that the rest of the federal government is running drills based on those findings, and Walmart is participating in those drills, probably to do, as you said, be used as shelters. Let's just call them shelters. All right? We don't have to say that they're prisons or anything else, but shelters, I guess. They're participating in it.
Right.
And so the new data shows, just as we had said before, that I definitely sent you when I was aware of it, was that the areas of a greater potential are shown in like a cherry red color, and that's right all over the New Madrid fault line. So right. This map shows. So obviously someone is preparing for something and whatever unrest that may cause. And so,
well, they know that the earthquakes have been quintupled. That's actually the report that we posted up. It's actually up there right now. That quintupled, which means there's a 5-fold increase in the risk of a major superquake like the 1811 quake. That means they know that the structures and the infrastructure and the overpasses and the highways and the power lines can't withstand this. They means that power outages, no shipping of food, no transmission of water or gas lines. The gas lines all over the damn place down there. People don't realize that, how dangerous that is. This is really bad. And the fact is Walmart have been disconnecting their stores gradually from major power line distribution systems and setting up fuel cells, just like a lot of the fuel cell companies here in California and other major factories, including Hollywood studios and others, are saying, we really don't like buying power from such and such and such local power company. It's unreliable, it's expensive, and we really don't have any protection that our system will actually still be in operation. And a lot of government buildings or so on are actually moving to their own fuel cell-based generation or solar panels on the roof. People need to start grasping what's going on here. Why are they doing this? They're doing this because they don't give a rat's behind about telling the public there's a real problem. They don't really want to tell people that they're not prepared for flash fires that'll pull up power lines like they did in 2007 that destroyed power distribution here in Southern California. They don't want to tell people that if these reactors go, you may not even be able to get away from the nuclear radiation when these plants go kaboom. That's not good.
No, it's not good at all. And so, now, anyway, it's interesting that that kind of information now becomes more public, and they're preparing for other things too. I've been studying what we would do in the United States for many years, and I know that you keep on talking about the SEISMIC studies, and I keep on saying, not all of them are in yet, but all of them show every power plant has to do something to beef up what the infrastructure that they rely on to mitigate any of the consequences of that type of an event. And so the Tennessee Valley Authority has completed building a seismic-proof structure to house portable equipment such as fire engines, portable pumps, everything that would have been very, very useful with Fukushima had they thought that deeply ahead. Now,
but I don't see them doing that. I see more papers being written to suggest what they might want to do if something happens, but they don't realize the urgency of the situation. Every year that this clock gets ticking, and if we start a physical war with a major power like Russia, we have to face the music that we're going to deal with geotectonic, cybernetic, and weather as well as earthquake weapons. We got to face that.
Cellular warfare, and the Russians have a mobile system that's extremely.
And we have to face the music that we have a red dwarf star approaching, which all the nations have been following, including Russia, at the SPT South Pole Telescope in Antarctica, McMurdo Bay, that we're all watching this object coming in, which is called the Destroyer, Herculebus, lots of other names for it, that they know that this is going to cause major havoc with the changes in the magnetosphere of the Earth, the ionosphere, the amount of ultraviolet and cosmic radiation. They know it's causing geotectonic and volcanic activity all over the planet that's increasing at a dramatically increased level. Well, Chris, so let's summarize. Basically, no action in terms of the JASCO report, and they're kind of trickling in at an enormously called glacial speed. We have Fukushima. What's happening at Fukushima Daiichi? Because you had a contact a week or so ago. We talked about their contact, what was happening there. We have the new tanks going in. Further proof that this so-called ice wall is completely useless. That'll actually increase subsidence and thixotropic, or turning the whole area into a gel-type mess. We have calls by scientists in Tokyo that basically say that Tokyo should be evacuated. It's the largest industrial area in the world. Over 50 million people live in that area of the greater Tokyo area. I've seen reports over a year ago that showed that some of the tube trains, actually, if you go through the tube train stations, they see their counters going crazy in terms of the amount of radiation. So it must be seeping in as far as 40, 50 kilometers or more away from the Fukushima prefecture into the tube trains. We know this is bubbling up with steam-generated and tritium-laced, radioisotope-laced steam miles out into the ocean floor, through the rock faces for miles, venting through, bubbling up from the deep ground because there's neutron beams. If you actually fly in at, say, sundown or through the night, you can actually see neutron flux beams hitting the nitrogen in the air, creating a blue light show, almost like, one of those rock shows. So when you see a blue beam, if you were to go to Google Earth, or if you actually were flying near Fukushima, you'd probably see little blue lines shooting through the sky. Those are neutron flux beams hitting nitrogen and causing a blue light. Bad news. And it also means that they're now saying this could bubble and continue releasing radiation for thousands of years. And you really don't have any way of containing it. Well, I do. And if I can put that together with you and talk about putting tents like Kevlar spider silk tents, or now talking about put a roof over it, the basic principles of stopping neutrons in water, they have still not approached properly. They need to dehydrate it and stop moving radioisotopes. They need to stop neutron flux, which causes critical reactions. And they need to stop doing things that put the place in more danger of more release into the Pacific Ocean and the world troposphere. So, Chris, what's happening in Fukushima? What's going on there?
Well, after talking with my colleague, who got back, we do understand why they were attempting the ice wall approach. And, because there are so many underground pipes in that area, they really did construct a maze. It was like painting themselves into a corner, so none of it's any good. But
right.
It's when you have all these underground pipes that you can't actually drive tiles into the dirt. Let's just say, all the way around it, and expect that kind of a dam to stop everything. Right. And so the next best thing would be the ice wall. But you know what? We're also thinking that you don't have enough power in the world to drive such an ice wall. And to keep it, and to freeze it, and to keep it frozen. So we obviously need another solution. We need something else, and maybe we can come up with we put our heads together, really come up with another alternative approach that really should be the main approach.
Well, I'll tell you what the main approach. I'll summarize it again for this record. First thing is dehydrate the entire site by creating a starlight, which is a 16 to 20,000 temperature barrier above the Fukushima Daiichi to completely divert that underground aquifer. Secondly, dehydrate the site with hyperosmolar borinated water, so you create a crystalline sarcophagus. Don't move anything anywhere. Monitor the actual neutron flux with a thing called a mu counter that kind of looks for muons that'll come out of the radioisotopes. That actually can do a muon imaging, which they can do. Use ground-penetrating radar to look laterally to see where the isotopes in the corium is collecting, and then specifically make sure that you put the concentrations of the neutron neutralizing borinated crystalline sarcophagus around those areas. Cap it off with a Kevlar spider-soaked tent over each facility and over the general facility. Have an air filtration system that literally pulls out the isotopes, a water filtration system that actually creates a seawall below Fukushima Daiichi and completely recycles all the water through a filtration system like the Alps, but it should work, and then literally guard over it forever. That's going to cost probably $300 to $400 billion to actually do it properly. It's going to be expensive. It's also should be there should be if you want to call it a place, let's say online, where people can visit the end of the so-called boiling nuclear age of creating power by boiling water with fissionable reactions. The fact is that the government has had nuclear fusion technology for 60 years plus. We do need what are called non-oxygen consuming energy generating technology. There's no limit in terms of what we call non-fossil fuels. The problem is when we kill the oceans and we kill the forests and we cut them down like you remember that song, they cut down the park and the forest to create a parking lot, with Joni Mitchell? Well, we've done it. We're also killing millions of square miles of the open oceans with 20,000 now dead zones. So the carbon-oxygen cycle is limited, so we really have a problem not limiting the idea of what's called peak fuel or peak CO2, which is a pile of crap. Because I know as an oceanographer scientist, what we have is peak oxygen. And I'm the primary proponent of the idea that we need to realize that the oxygen-carbon cycle has a little stretch. You put more CO2 in a greenhouse, things grow faster. But you overwhelm it and you kill the oceans and you cut down the forests and you poison them with heavy metals by geoengineering the upper atmosphere and kill the intermycorrhizae lichens, so the trees start dying around the world and the plants don't grow. You eventually develop what's called world COPD, chronic obstructive world disease, COWD, COWD. And the chronic obstructive world disease means your carbon-oxygen cycle is impaired and you cannot dump out a whole pile of CO2, not because you end up with peak oxygen, because you start depleting oxygen. For example, an A380 jet uses up more oxygen in 1 hour than every human being breathes and consumes on Earth every day. That's a lot. And people need to realize there's a limit. If you continue using what's called non-fossil fuels, you continue using dangerous nuclear material like fissionable material that is radioactive for billions of years, you create a world that's toxic. And we need to have non-toxic energy-generating technology, which we can have. But we need to move into a new type of nuclear age where we have solar, nuclear, and energy out of a vacuum technology that allows us to have safe energy generation that's decentralized, that allows people to have what I call portable and small community, we call fusion nuclear reactors and other technologies, so we don't end up, like the muon fusion reactors that were developed by a gentleman out of Vancouver, Canada, that talked about these types of cold fusion technology. It's there. We just don't want to popularize it. Anybody who tries to push these things has a short half-life. I had a gentleman, I think it was 6 years ago, sent me information about his technology, which he actually sent me the patents, and 4 months later I found out from his friend that they killed him. So you have to understand, if you tick off the bankers, if you tick off the energy generation cabal of the billionaires, they kill you. That's the way it is. What do you think?
Well, technology is always at first hidden. I'll tell you what, I worked with a fella who took technology and devised a way to take what used to fit in an entire building as far as a particle beam and made it so that it could fit on a desk. And of course, it's all military application. And
of course it is. And of course, that's level 1 science, tier 1 science it's sequestered to companies like General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Bechtel Corporation, Sun Microsystems, all kinds of different companies.
30 years ago, I had a 5-sided multipolar magnet demonstrated to me that could levitate, could produce power, could fly at hypersonic speeds, all using the Earth's magnetic field as a ground plate, basically free energy. And guess what? Haven't heard a word about it. Another hit the market, and as long as the powers that be are in power, it
the
ain't
satanic powers that be. People need to realize the reason why we're in such a state is we're in the grip of Satan, and his minions are temporarily alive and well on Earth, but their lease is up real soon. And we need to firstly be aware, we need to pray, we need to stand and tell the truth. We need to raise out the options and not be worried about receiving ad hominem attacks that we're crazy because we think these things are conspiracy theories. It's not a theory. It's just reality. And the great thing is that our God is God, and that if we become real believers, we know that the end of this mess is a glorious new world where human beings can live safely in a world that's non-toxic, with limitless energy and access to information, with an extended human lifespan. A whole new world is coming. But we got a long way to go, a lot of mess to clean up.